There's a mathematical sequence that has toppled for dominant civilizations across 8 centuries. And in 2025, we're watching the Fifth Empire march through the identical phases, hitting the same triggers, making the same catastrophic mistakes. Every single time, the rulers saw it coming. Every single time, they convinced themselves the rules didn't apply to them. Every single time, they were spectacularly wrong. In 1637, the Dutch Republic controlled global maritime trade. Their banks financed kingdoms. The guilder was the currency of choice across 3 continents. Amsterdam was the wealthiest city on the planet. 70 years later, they were a regional player, their golden age of memory. In 1720, France under Louis XIV was Europe's dominant force. The lever was trusted everywhere. French culture defined sophistication. Their military set the standard. Within a century, revolution tore it apart from the inside. In 1900, the Austro-Hungarian Empire spanned Central Europe. 50 million subjects, industrial power, cultural influence. 18 years later, it ceased to exist, shattered not by defeat alone but by internal economic fracture. In 1980, Japan was unstoppable. Their economy was growing faster than America's. Experts predicted they'd overtake the United States by 2000. Their real estate and stock market reached levels that made 1929 look rational. Then, it all imploded. 3 decades later, they still haven't recovered. 4 empires, 4 total breakdowns. 4 instances of leaders insisting their situation was unique, while following the exact playbook that guaranteed failure. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. The United States has already crossed 6 of the 7 thresholds. We're not heading toward the pattern, we're living inside it. This is how dominance ends. Why civilizations always believe they're immune, and why the numbers say America is next in line. Welcome to Finance Folder. What you're about to see isn't speculation. It's historical precedent playing out in real time. Let me show you what empire death actually means. Not in academic papers, but in practical reality. What happens when a dominant power implodes? Economic collapse of empires doesn't begin with foreign conquest or battlefield losses. It begins with fiscal overreach. The empire commits to more than its economy can sustain. Military installations across 100 nations, conflicts on multiple continents, obligations it cannot honor, liabilities it cannot service. Initially, the deterioration is invisible to citizens. The currency still functions in daily life. The armed forces still achieve tactical victories. The leadership still makes confident projections. But underneath the surface, the structural integrity is disintegrating. Capital is misallocated on a massive scale. Manufacturing capability, contracts, the talented emigrate to rising powers. Then comes the exponential phase. Allied nations start preparing contingency plans. Adversaries probe for weakness. Trading partners develop alternative systems. Reserve currency dominance begins to erode. And suddenly, every advantage that created your power transforms into a liability. Your currency, once hoarded globally, floods back into domestic markets, causing inflation. Your military, distributed across every continent, becomes financially impossible to maintain. Your guarantees, once backed by economic strength, become worthless paper. That's not academic theory. That's precisely what destroyed the Dutch, France, Austria-Hungary, and Japan. And it happened because they executed the identical decisions we're executing right now. They assumed their dominance was permanent. They overextended their military commitments. They manipulated their monetary system. And they denied reality until collapse was already in motion. Let me walk you through how it actually unfolded, 4 times. The identical sequence start with the Dutch Republic, 1600s to 1700s. This was the first truly global financial power. After breaking free from Spanish control in the late 1500s, the Dutch built an empire on trade and finance. They created the first modern stock market, the first central bank, the first system of public debt that other nations copied. By 1650, Dutch ships carried more cargo than England, France, Spain, and Portugal combined. The Dutch East India Company was the most valuable corporation ever created, worth the equivalent of 7 trillion in today's money. Amsterdam was the financial center of the world. The guilder was the reserve currency. Everyone needed guilders to participate in global trade. And this is where the sequence initiates, with a nation that controls global finance and assumes that makes them untouchable. Stage 1. Military overcommitment. The Dutch Republic fought England 3 times in naval wars, fought France twice on land, maintained colonial operations in Indonesia, the Caribbean, South Africa, and Brazil. For a nation of fewer than 2 million people, they were defending economic interests on 4 continents. The expense was crushing. By 1670, 40% of government revenue went to the military and debt service. And they kept expanding commitments. Stage 2. Financial manipulation. The Dutch pioneered fractional reserve banking and credit expansion. They discovered they could loan out more money than they held in reserves, creating money through accounting. Initially, this seemed brilliant. It fueled trade and growth. But it also meant their monetary system was built on confidence rather than tangible assets. When confidence wavered, the entire structure became vulnerable. By 1672, when France invaded, there was a run on Dutch banks. They couldn't convert paper to metal. The guilder lost credibility. Stage 3. Debt acceleration. The Dutch government borrowed constantly to finance wars and trade subsidies. By 1680, their debt-to-revenue ratio exceeded 15 to 1. 15 years of total government income just to pay off the debt. They were trapped in a cycle where they borrowed to pay interest on previous borrowing. Sound familiar? Stage 4. Industrial decline. Here's what most historians miss about Dutch collapse. They had all the money in the world, and it destroyed their productive economy. Why manufacture goods when you can finance manufacturing elsewhere and take a cut? Why innovate when you can invest in other people's innovations? The Dutch became middlemen. Capital flowed through Amsterdam, but actual production moved elsewhere. England built ships. France grew food. The Dutch just financed and traded. By 1700, Dutch manufacturing had contracted 30% from its peak. They were entirely dependent on imports, entirely dependent on maintaining their position as financial intermediaries. When England and France developed their own financial systems, the Dutch advantage evaporated. Stage 5. Brain drain. As the economy stagnated, the best minds left. Merchants moved to London. Bankers relocated to Paris. Engineers went to England, where the Industrial Revolution was starting. The Dutch Republic was left with administrators and traders, no one building the next generation of wealth. By 1750, the Dutch Golden Age was history. They remained wealthy on paper, but irrelevant in terms of power. They went from global financial hegemon to a regional European state in roughly 80 years. The guilder became a local currency. Amsterdam became a provincial financial center. Today, the Netherlands is a pleasant, prosperous country with excellent infrastructure and cheese. But they're not a global power. They're not shaping world events. They're a cautionary example of what happens when financial dominance masks economic decline. Now let's jump to France. 1600s to 1800s. The empire that spent itself into revolution. At its peak under Louis XIV, France was the continental superpower. Population of 20 million, triple England's size. The most powerful army in Europe. Cultural dominance that made French the language of diplomacy. The lever was accepted everywhere. Paris was the center of art, science, and philosophy, and just like the Dutch before them, they believed their position was unassailable. But they were already locked into the sequence. Stage 1. Military overreach. France fought nearly constant wars from 1667 to 1789. Wars against the Dutch, wars against Spain, wars against Austria, wars against England, supporting American independence. Louis XIV alone fought for major wars. His great-great-great-grandson, Louis XVI, financed the American Revolution. The costs were astronomical. By 1788, half of government spending went to the military and servicing war debt. The country was on a permanent war footing, and the treasury was empty. Stage 2. Currency destruction. France tried every monetary trick to pay its bills. They issued paper money called assignats, supposedly backed by seized church lands. They promised convertibility to gold within 5 years. They'd printed so many assignats that they became worthless. A loaf of bread cost 200 assignats. Workers demanded payment in gold or goods because paper was garbage. By 1796, the government gave up and declared the assignats dead. Anyone holding French paper money lost everything. The monetary system collapsed entirely. Stage 3. Debt catastrophe. By 1789, French government debt was so massive that they couldn't even calculate the total accurately. Estimates ranged from 3 to 4 billion livres. Annual revenue was about 500 million. They were spending 600 million. The math didn't work. They tried raising taxes. The population revolted. They tried cutting spending. The military and bureaucracy revolted. They tried borrowing more. No one would lend. They were trapped. Stage 4. Productive collapse. While France spent on wars and palaces, England was industrializing. While French nobles collected rents, English entrepreneurs built factories. While France imported manufactured goods, England became the workshop of the world. By 1789, French economic output per capita was declining. Agricultural yields were stagnant. Manufacturing was primitive compared to England. The wealth gap between the nobility and everyone else reached obscene levels. The economy wasn't growing, it was hollowing out. Stage 5. Social disintegration. When the economy fails, society fractures. Food shortages became common. Bread riots broke out regularly. Crime exploded. Trust in institutions vanished. The French Revolution wasn't primarily about ideology. It was about economic collapse, triggering political chaos. In 1789, the entire system imploded. The monarchy fell, the currency died. The old order was swept away in blood. France recovered, eventually, but they never regained the dominant position they held under Louis XIV. The lever was replaced. The empire was lost. They became one power among many rather than the power. Let's move to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, 1867 to 1918, the shortest collapse cycle yet. After centuries of Habsburg dominance in Central Europe, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was formalized in 1867 as a dual monarchy, 50 million people, industrial base, cultural sophistication, Vienna was one of the great cities of the world. The krona was a solid currency backed by gold. They controlled critical territory connecting Western and Eastern Europe, and they assumed their empire would endure forever. It lasted 51 years. Stage 1. Military overcommitment. Austria-Hungary had potential enemies on every border. They had to watch Russia to the east, Italy to the south, Serbia in the Balkans, and increasingly hostile nationalist movements internally. When World War I started in 1914, they were instantly locked into a multi-front war. They fought Russia, Serbia, Italy, and Romania simultaneously. The cost was unsustainable for their industrial base. By 1916, they were dependent on German support to continue fighting. Stage 2. Monetary breakdown. To pay for the war, Austria-Hungary suspended gold convertibility in 1914 and started printing money. The krona, which had been stable for decades, began losing value immediately. By 1918, it had lost over 70% of its purchasing power. Soldiers were paid in currency that bought less every month. Citizens stopped trusting the krona and hoarded goods instead. The monetary system was disintegrating while the war continued. Stage 3. Debt implosion. War bonds, loans from Germany, internal borrowing. Austria-Hungary accumulated debt at a rate their economy could never support. By 1918, the debt-to-GDP ratio exceeded 250%. There was no mathematical way to pay it back. The empire was technically bankrupt before the war even ended. Stage 4. Industrial failure. The war consumed everything. Factories that produced consumer goods were converted to weapons manufacturing. Agriculture was neglected as men went to fight. Food shortages became severe by 1917. The empire couldn't feed itself or supply itself. Production was falling while expenses were rising. The economic model was broken. Stage 5. Internal collapse. Austria-Hungary wasn't just an empire. It was a collection of ethnic groups held together by force. Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, Ukrainians, Romanians, Croats, Serbs, Italians. When the economy collapsed and the military was defeated, there was nothing holding it together. In October 1918, the whole thing fell apart. National councils declared independence. The empire dissolved in weeks. On November 11, 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire ceased to exist. From dominant Central European power to complete dissolution in 4 years of war and economic collapse. The krona became worthless. The territory was divided into multiple new nations. The Habsburg dynasty ended. Today, Austria is a landlocked country of 9 million people. Pleasant, wealthy, but utterly irrelevant in global power terms. Now let's examine the most recent example before the current one. Japan, 1945 to 1990s to present. After World War II, Japan rebuilt with American support and became an economic miracle. By 1980, they were the second largest economy on Earth. Their growth rate was triple America's. Their manufacturing quality set global standards. The yen was strengthening. Japanese companies were buying American real estate and corporations. Experts in 1989 genuinely believed Japan would overtake the United States economically by 2000 or 2010 at the latest. Then the pattern kicked in. Stage 1. Economic overextension. Japan didn't overextend militarily, they overextended financially. Their banks loaned money to anyone. Corporations borrowed to expand into every market. Real estate speculation went insane. By 1989, the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was theoretically worth more than all of California. Stock prices were 40 times earnings. The entire economy was overextended on credit and speculation. Stage 2. Asset bubble. The Bank of Japan kept interest rates low to fuel growth. Money was cheap. Everyone borrowed to invest in stocks and real estate. Prices went vertical. The Nikkei stock index hit 39,000 in December 1989. Real estate prices were so inflated that mortgages were issued for 100 years because no one could afford normal terms. It was insanity, and everyone knew it, but no one wanted to stop. Stage 3. Bubble collapse. In 1990, the Bank of Japan raised interest rates to cool speculation. The bubble popped, stock market crashed, real estate crashed. By 1992, the Nikkei was at 15,000, down 60%. Real estate lost half its value. Banks that had loaned trillions based on inflated collateral were suddenly holding worthless assets. The banking system was insolvent. Stage 4. Deflationary spiral. With asset prices collapsing, consumers stopped spending, corporations stopped investing, banks stopped lending. The economy entered deflation, where prices fall year after year. That sounds good until you realize falling prices mean falling wages, rising unemployment, and increasing real debt burdens. Japan has been fighting deflation for 30 years. Stage 5. Lost decades. From 1990 to 2020, Japanese economic growth averaged less than 1% annually. An entire generation has lived through stagnation. The Nikkei didn't return to its 1989 peak until 2024. 34 years later, Japan went from an unstoppable economic force to a cautionary tale about what happens when financial bubbles collapse. They're still a wealthy country, but they're not dynamic. They're not growing. they're managing decline. For empires, for different contexts, for identical patterns. The Dutch had trade, France had military power, Austria-Hungary had territory, Japan had manufacturing, didn't matter. The sequence played out the same way every time. Overextension, monetary manipulation, debt crisis, productive decline, social or economic breakdown. And here's the critical point. None of them saw it coming. None of them believed it could happen to them. They all thought they were different, special, immune to the pattern. They were all wrong. Which brings us to the present. The United States, 2025. We've already completed 6 stages. Let me show you. Stage 1, military overextension. America has over 800 military bases in 70 countries. We have active military personnel in over 150 nations. We're committed to defending NATO's 32 members, defending Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines. We're countering China in the Pacific, countering Russia in Europe, fighting proxy conflicts in the Middle East, maintaining presence in Africa. Our defense budget is $900 billion annually, more than the next 10 nations combined, and we're stretched desperately thin. Recruitment is failing. Equipment is aging. If multiple crises hit simultaneously, China moves on Taiwan, Russia escalates in Ukraine, Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, we cannot respond adequately to all of it at once. We're overcommitted to a degree that would make Imperial Spain nervous. Check. Stage 2, currency manipulation. In 1971, Nixon ended dollar-gold convertibility. Since then, the dollar has been pure fiat currency, backed by nothing except trust and military power. Since 2000, the M2 money supply has increased over 400%. Since 2020, we've created over $6 trillion through quantitative easing and COVID spending. The dollar has lost 97% of its purchasing power since 1971. We're not debasing silver coins. We're creating unlimited digital currency. The method has changed. The effect is identical. Debasement? Check. Stage 3, debt spiral. The United States currently owes $36 trillion. That's 123% of GDP. Annual interest payments are now approaching $1.2 trillion, exceeding defense spending. We ran a $1.7 trillion deficit in 2023, in 2024, nearly $2 trillion during economic growth. During peacetime, we're borrowing money to pay interest on previous borrowing. That's the textbook definition of a debt spiral. Spain defaulted 4 times in 40 years. France collapsed under debt. Austria-Hungary went bankrupt during war. Japan is still servicing bubbles from 1990. We're following the identical trajectory. Check. Stage 4. Industrial hollowing. America doesn't manufacture at scale anymore. We design products. We brand products. We finance production. But we don't make things. Our manufacturing base has been systematically offshored over 40 years. We import pharmaceuticals from India and China. We import electronics from Asia. We import steel. We import rare earth elements. We even import components for military systems. We run an $800 billion trade deficit annually. More dollars flow out than goods flow in. Just like Spain imported everything while silver flowed out. Just like the Dutch financed production elsewhere, we're consuming while others produce. When the dollar's reserve status ends, when countries don't need to hold dollars anymore, those dollars come flooding back home. With our hollowed out production, we can't absorb that. We get inflation we cannot control. Check. Stage 5. Social fracturing. Trust in government institutions is at historic lows. Congress approval rating is under 20%. Trust in media is under 30%. Political polarization is extreme. Cities have visible homelessness crises. Drug overdose deaths exceed 100,000 annually. Life expectancy is declining. Fertility rate is at 1.6, well below replacement. The education system is failing. Infrastructure is crumbling. We can't build anything anymore without it taking decades and costing billions over budget. The social fabric is tearing. Check. Stage 6. Reserve currency erosion. This is the critical stage. This is where the collapse accelerates. The dollar is still the global reserve currency. Roughly 60% of foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars. Most commodities are priced in dollars, but the cracks are spreading. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively developing alternatives. China and Russia are trading in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil sales. Central banks globally are buying gold at record rates, diversifying away from dollars. The European Union is pushing for euro-denominated energy contracts. Even America's closest allies are quietly preparing for a post-dollar world. We're not at full collapse of dollar dominance yet, but the process has started. Once it reaches critical mass, once countries don't need to hold dollars for trade, the dam breaks. Trillions of dollars held overseas flood back into the United States. That's hyperinflation. That's currency crisis. That's the triggering event for Stage 7. We're at the edge of Stage 6 right now. Check. Stage 7 is total collapse, not gradual decline. Sudden implosion. The Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent in less than 3 years. Austria-Hungary dissolved in months. France collapsed into revolution in weeks once the crisis hit. Japan's bubble popped in 1 year, and they've never recovered their trajectory. When reserve currency status fails, when debt becomes unmaintainable, when the military cannot be funded, it doesn't decline gracefully over generations. It collapses within years, sometimes months, and everyone who said it couldn't happen learns the same lesson. It absolutely can, and it does. For empires followed this exact pattern. The Dutch Republic, France, Austria-Hungary, Japan, each one believed they were exceptional. Each one believed the rules didn't apply to them. Each one believed their power was permanent. Every single one was catastrophically wrong. We're telling ourselves the identical lies right now. We're different. We have technology, we have the dollars, network effect, we have nuclear weapons. We're America. But the pattern doesn't care about extremism. The pattern is mathematical. You cannot spend beyond your productive capacity indefinitely. You cannot maintain global military commitments without the economic base to support them. You cannot create infinite currency without destroying its value. You cannot skip stage 7 once you've completed stages 1 through 6. The sequence is locked. The only variable is timing. Perhaps we have a decade, perhaps 5 years, perhaps 18 months. But the pattern, which has destroyed 4 empires across 8 centuries using the identical sequence, says collapse is inevitable. And when it arrives, it will be rapid. A currency crisis triggers a debt crisis, triggers a political crisis. Overnight, the superpower becomes a case study. The reserve currency becomes a regional currency. The empire becomes history. For times it's happened before, the math says we're next in line. Since 2020, we've accelerated through every stage, printed trillions, accumulated massive debt, expanded military commitments, hollowed out production further, fractured society deeper. We're not walking the pattern anymore. We're sprinting through it. And if you understand the sequence, the end is visible. Maybe we'll discover an escape. Maybe America can achieve what the Dutch, French, Austrians, and Japanese couldn't. Maybe we'll reform, restructure, rebuild. Maybe this time genuinely is different. But for empires, 8 centuries, identical pattern, identical result. The math says otherwise. History, which has watched dominant powers collapse the same way repeatedly, says we're about to learn this lesson the hardest way possible. If this analysis showed you where we actually stand in the historical sequence, subscribe to Finance Folder right now, because when stages 6 and 7 fully hit, you'll need to understand what's happening and why. Hit that like button if this changed how you see the current economic situation. The answers aren't hidden in the future. They're written in the past, and the past is screaming at us right now. We're just not listening.